Now, if you've had a chance to look at the page, the functions of democracy, it's a list. Now, really, what this is, before we get going on this list, is a list of the things that really describe the virtues and strengths and functions of a liberal democracy. Now, we haven't fully defined the term liberal democracy yet, but a liberal democracy, because it differentiates democracies from all those other sorts of systems which call themselves democracies. The People's Democratic Republic of North Korea, for instance, sees itself as a democracy. And in fact, most systems in the world will at least give themselves the veneer or this kind of shop window of being a democracy. Now, what we would say, what differentiates those kind of democracies, not flawed democracies, unreal democracies, pretend democracies, or centralized democracies, is that they are not liberal democracies. And the key term there is freedom. Freedom to participate, freedom to vote in elections which actually have a choice, and so on. So really all the virtues on that page and the functions of democracy are really restricted to liberal democracy. Democracies which embrace the idea of freely participating in that democracy. Here's the writer Michael Ignatieff, who was the leader of the Liberal Party in Canada and now is director of a school, or runs a school in Hungary. And he is being interviewed and explaining why he thinks that liberal democracy and democracy are really the same thing. You shouldn't differentiate. A democracy that isn't a liberal democracy really isn't a democracy.
And what is an illiberal democracy?
There are a lot of people who think an illiberal democracy is a contradiction in terms. You can't have a democracy unless it's liberal. And by liberal, I don't mean capital L liberal, permissive, relativist. I don't mean people like me, right? Liberal means something technical. It means you've got courts, you've got a right of appeal, you've got constitutional rights, you've got a free press. That's what liberal democracy means. And a lot of people nowadays in the 21st century think democracy simply means majority rule. It simply means elections. And I think the right way to think about democracy is it is majority rule, certainly. It's a free election, certainly. But it's also independent judiciary, a free press, regulatory agencies that are not captured by big corporations. It means a lot of things to keep us free. And in my case, because I run a university, it means free universities, universities that are free to teach and learn whatever they want. Now, I currently work in what is called an illiberal democracy in Hungary. Hungary is a wonderful country. I married a Hungarian, so I'm pretty fond of Hungary, right? But they do not have a free press, or it's almost been crushed. They don't have an independent judiciary. Not really. They say they do. It looks like one, but believe me, it does what the government tells you. And as a consequence, they don't have free universities. I'm trying to keep a free university in Budapest, a university in which we can choose our curriculum. We can teach what we want to teach. We can admit who we want to admit. Not a lot of people associate democracy with universities, but believe me, a university is part of what makes for a free society. So I'd say there's no such thing as a liberal democracy. It's a contradiction in terms. You either have a democracy with those institutions, or you start not to have any democracy.
Have a look at the speech on the page, lower down the page, Functions of Democracy, by George Bush. Now, George Bush cannot be, by any stretch of the imagination, be described as one of the great orators of American politics, or any politics for that matter. He's quite famous for his sort of discombobulating way of using the English language. However, this speech actually is quite coherent for George Bush. He's speaking before to the National Endowment for Democracy, a kind of pressure group, interest group, think tank that promotes the virtues of democracy. And it's in 2001, and he's just at the point when America is about to go to war against Iraq and is at war inside Afghanistan. What he's going to outline for some people is neoliberalism. It's a neoliberalist foreign policy, or neoconservatism, I should say rather, neoconservatist foreign policy, which is going to argue that America should use its power, very much the brainchild of Dick Cheney. And Bush is going to say America's powerful and it should use its power, to promote democracy. After all, what is power if it isn't to do good in the world? He's going to make the case that democracy is kind of inevitable. He says, through the clip I've shown you can see the full thing on YouTube, but the clip I've shown you, he outlines what good societies have. You know, successful societies have this, successful societies have this. Well, they're all the things that you've just listed in a pluralist, open, liberal democracy. Multiple points of view, a genuine debate, freedom of movement, freedom of religion, freedom generally, and freedom will lead to a more efficient society. It's the best of all possible systems. If it's the best of all possible systems, it's kind of inevitable, and he pretty much argues that many societies might try other things, a fascist dictatorship, a one-party state, an authoritarian state, but they are going to, in the long run, fail. They're going to fail because of endemic corruption, because they're not as dynamic, because they aren't as educated, because people become unsatisfied. As people's wealth grows, they will want more freedom. In other words, the desire for greater individual liberalism and freedom, liberty that is, is unstoppable. So it's like, this is the view that China or North Korea or anywhere like that is a kind of pressure cooker, and you can keep on holding the lid down with greater and greater prosperity and advancing economy. In the end, it's going to blow. Economy. So one of the great experiments of our age is whether Chinese-style authoritarian one-party capitalism, which is what it really is, of course, even though they call themselves communist, is more successful than American-style pluralistic liberal democracy. Bush here in 2001 is saying, yeah, it is. Liberal democracy is going to work. It's inevitable.
Central principles common to every successful society in every culture. Successful societies limit the power of the state and the power of the military so that governments respond to the will of the people and not the will of the elite. Successful societies protect freedom with the consistent and impartial rule of law instead of selectively applying the law to punish political opponents. Successful societies allow room for healthy civic institutions, for political parties and labor unions and independent newspapers and broadcast media. Successful societies guarantee religious liberty, the right to serve and honor God without fear of persecution. Successful societies privatize their economies and secure the rights of property. They prohibit and punish official corruption and invest in the health and education of their people. They recognize the rights of women. And instead of directing hatred and resentment against others, successful societies appeal to the hopes of their own people. These vital principles are being applied in the nations of Afghanistan and Iraq.
Because he's opening himself up to a slight contradiction, because he's about to go to war to introduce, at the point of a gun, I mean, it was Robespierre who said no one likes a missionary with a sword. At the point of a gun, this is another problem, you're going to invade Iraq in the name of making them free. You know, it's a kind of Rousseauian kind of, I'm going to force you to be free. Well, America's going to force the Iraqis to be free, and they'll be dead grateful, they'll be so happy. Well, because we know it didn't quite work out that way. Even to this day, Iraq is a highly flawed democracy, and Afghanistan's democracy is hanging by the skin of its teeth, and indeed is hardly a functioning democracy at all. But I think if I had George Bush in front of me now, I'd simply say, well, it's taking longer than I thought, but don't worry. The course of history flows in the direction of liberal democracy. If that's true, then you don't need to go to war with anyone. You just need to let it happen. And that's going to be one of the arguments that, of course, appears in socialism. Right from the beginnings, the first ideas of socialism. Socialism is inevitable. If socialism is inevitable, we can just sit back and let it happen. I mean, you can encourage it a bit of education here, a bit of agitation there, but you don't actually have any revolutions, smashing of windows or lighting of bombs and hurling them at people. You don't have to do that because socialism is inevitable. Well, if liberal democracy is inevitable, then all you have to do is watch and sit back and rather sort of smugly wait for the Chinese system to blow, and or North Korea to implode, and in the end, democracy is the one who laughs last, because in the end, liberal democracy is inevitable. The force and course of history flows in its direction. Now, this is going to be countered by the view, really, that nothing inevitable about democracy at all. It's extremely fragile and depends upon a set of circumstances, which mean that actually, if you look at human history, democracy is rare. It tends not to last long and needs an awful lot of work to keep it going. It's a very high maintenance sort of system, which is true. Well, we're going to explore a little bit of those. But now, let's have a look at direct democracy.